Hello friends, a very important article has appeared in the Hindu. It is written by Happymon Jacob, who is an international affairs expert. The article has basically two aspects. One is the relevance of BRICS in the current context, and the second one is how is India viewing itself in the international affairs and what is the future of its international policies. So first we will discuss the BRICS part. If you want to download this slide, you can find the link in the description box, and if you want to listen to this video in Hindi, then you can go to our another channel, that is prepezee. Basically the context is that global world order is changing. We can see that earlier it was a unipolar world after the collapse of Soviet Union, but now one pole has been occupied by the US and China has emerged as the second pole. Earlier it was Russia, which was considered to be US enemy number one, but now it is China, and Russia is in the supporting role nowadays. And in fact, the world has been divided between these two poles. Apart from that, there are certain regional issues which are also cropping up. For example, in the Middle East, we are seeing that Saudi Arabia and UAE are at loggerheads. They are fighting among themselves. In fact, earlier it was like Saudi Arabia and UAE were on one side and Iran was on the opposite side. But right now the issues between Saudi Arabia and UAE, and both are having different contentions on which they are fighting. Ukraine war has also led to formation of two blocks. One again is majorly occupied by US and its Western allies who are supporting Ukraine, and then China and some other nations who are supporting Russia. So therefore, we see that the global order is changing and multiple issues are cropping up day by day. On this, India's position is yet not very clear because India sometimes goes with Russia, which is considered as its historical friend, and sometimes it seems closer to US, with which we are seeing a very latest bonhomie going on, and the Indian leaders, that is Prime Minister Modi's and the US presidents, their personal relations are also improving at a great level. Apart from that, there is yet another issue. First aspect is whether India is now inside the developed nations ambit or whether it is still the leader of developing countries. That is also something which we have to discuss. And also secondly, that where India finds itself, whether on the western side of the hemisphere, that is the western nations, or whether it is still allied with Russia, which seems difficult considering its conflicts which are going on with China. So we'll discuss that, but what is the relevance of BRICS in all this changing world order? Is BRICS still relevant or has it lost its relevance? That is what we are going to discuss today. But first, what actually is BRICS? See, the second part, that is the international affairs and India's future policies, that we'll cover up in the later video. So basically, BRICS, in 2001, Jim O'Neill, that is the chief economist of Goldman Sachs, he coined this term BRIC. He said that Brazil, Russia, India and China, these four countries, they are emerging as one of the most important leaders in the global economy, and going forward they'll be playing a very major role in the coming days in the global economy. So in 2009, these four countries met together informally and then formed an informal group called as BRIC. Later on, South Africa also expressed its desire to be inside the grouping, and in 2010 it was also made a member. Now the group being called as BRICS, as S was added for the South Africa. So right now we see that there are 5 members in BRICS. Combinedly, they represent 40% of the world population. But then again, majorly this population resides in India and China. Apart from that, if we talk about the global economy, then they are also accounting for a quarter, that is almost 25% of the global economy. The current summit which is going on, it is 15th summit of these BRICS nations, and it is being currently held in Johannesburg, which is in South Africa. The summit will be held from 22nd of August to 24th of August. Now, if we talk about that, what is the current utility of BRICS, then we find that right now the utility of BRICS is very limited and it is not playing any major role in the global economy or global polity. The major reasons for this is, firstly, it is not clear about its objectives, and secondly, we see that there are a lot of disagreements between the member nations. If we talk about the objectives, BRICS is not clear what role it has to play. Is it going to replace United Nations? It doesn't seem so. Is it going to replace G7, which is actually a West dominated and very less representative grouping? No, it doesn't seem so. G7 is very less representative, and yet it has a distinct cohesiveness. The members, they are on the same side of political alignment. If we talk about G20, which is much more representative and yet it is still dominated by the Western countries, then we see again what BRICS is going to do. Probably it gives an impression that it is kind of an anti-Western alliance. And yet, India is one country which stands out even if when we talk about this paradigm anti-West. India is not exactly aligned politically with China. And therefore, we see that BRICS finds itself with multiple objectives, and yet none of the objectives seems very clear in their mind. So therefore, first of all, whether they are going for economic cohesion, whether the members of BRICS are going to be aligned politically, whether this is a military grouping, none of these points are very clear, and that is why BRICS does not necessarily inspire any confidence between the member nations. Secondly, if we talk about the disagreements, we see that India and China, they are having major disagreements majorly on the border issue. Apart from that, even on the trade front also, India is suffering from a major trade deficit in between the two countries' trade, that is India and China. If we talk about Russia also, initially Russia and China were having major differences as China was found to be reverse engineering the Russian products and creating them its own. So now, but they are much more aligned because now Russia has seen that China is the only country which is supporting it in the Ukraine war or in another major conflicts such as the trade issues or the Trump issue or other issues. Therefore, we see that disagreement between the member nations, and relatively Brazil and South Africa, they do not have much heft in the international relations or in the international affairs. So therefore, we see that the BRICS is lacking its utility. But then, not all is lost for BRICS. In fact, we see that tomorrow it is possible that BRICS might play an important role in the future. It might emerge as one grouping which is playing some important role and which is having some global heft when it makes certain statements on the global issues. Why is that? See, right now if we talk about the global governance, we see that United Nations is one institution which is having the most number of representatives of international affairs and basically the international members. Now, in the United Nations, major decision making is being done by the United Nations Security Council. Here also we see that there are 5 permanent members, that is US, UK, France, Russia and China. These 5 members, they are holding a veto and majorly they are the ones who are taking any major decisions. And therefore the other 190 odd nations, they sometimes sense a deep anguish as well as an anger that why they are not the part of decision making, despite playing important role in they are doing their duties, they are fulfilling their obligations, and yet they are not sitting at the high table. Sometimes they get a seat as a non-permanent member, but then that does not fulfill their aspirations. The decisions are being taken by 5 nations, despite being the existence of General Assembly is there, but yet the decisions are being taken by United Nations Security Council, and it seems that the other countries are lesser members. They are at the second rung. They are not at the high value. They are not occupying the high value positions. And therefore, it seems that the global governance is lacking democratic credentials as of now. Similarly, in many contexts and in many incidents, we have seen that global governance is a failure. For example, after 9/11 attacks, US attacked Iraq as well as Afghanistan. It said that Iraq is having weapons of mass destruction. Similarly, Afghanistan is having groups like Taliban and other terrorists are being harbored by the Afghanistan. And yet nothing actually substantial was found, and US fulfilled its own military objectives in these two countries. Since then, we have seen that UN has not been able to provide any protection to any member state despite it claiming whatever it wants for its survival and its preservation. Similarly, even on the Ukraine war, when Russia and Ukraine were drawn into a conflict, we saw that United Nations had played only a very limited role, and it has been limited to lip service only. It has not taken any concrete measures to stop that war or call for any kind of ceasefire. So it does not really hold any potential, and it does not seem that it is having any concrete ground effect. So that is why many countries, they are eager to join BRICS. They see it as one grouping which is much more representative, as it is having many members from the global south as well as members who are on the eastern side, that is the communist side of the global political divide. So here we see that this membership, that is BRICS, is having one member from South America also, and as well as Asia also is being represented here. We see that even the African nations are being represented. So barring the developed nations of West, the grouping, despite being a very limited grouping of 5 members, is seeing a representation from the global south, developing countries as well as the developed countries. So therefore, we see that many countries are lining up to join BRICS. Similarly, after Ukraine war, there has been certain uncertainties which have been thrown up after the war has taken place. Earlier, it was considered that if you are having any conflicts also, you will solve them or resolve them by bilateral talks. But right now, with the annexation of Crimea as well as the attack on Ukraine, Russia has showed that battle, war and other attacks are still in prevalence. They are not yet over. And therefore, in the international arena also, some countries are seeing uncertainties being developed and they are eager to hedge their position for their survival. Rise of China is one very important factor. You see that Belt and Road Initiative, which we have discussed earlier also, China is pumping so much of its own money. And also again, see, India is not in favor of Belt and Road Initiative. India has said categorically that it is infringing upon its territorial integrity as well as sovereignty, because Belt and Road Initiative, it is passing through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Also, India has said that for the smaller nations, this is actually a debt trap. China is not giving anything away in charity. It is a businessman, it is investing its money and then it is expecting certain profits out of that, which the smaller nations in which it is investing might not be able to pay. And therefore, India has cautioned the smaller nations that you should be looking at your own pockets, because when China is extorting its own money from you, then you will not be able to pay it back. And therefore, there are these disagreements which are going on, and yet, despite that, because of China's deep pockets, the uncertainties of Ukraine war and the global governance failure, we see that BRICS is now seeing an important institution as many countries are applying for it. For example, countries like Indonesia, Egypt, Argentina, UAE, they want to be a part of BRICS. Other reasons are, see, when COVID-19 occurred, then at that time, the Western countries, they started hoarding all the vaccines. In fact, it was India which started donating its vaccines to the poorer nations, and it was given a lot of appreciation for the same. But then again, seeing the attitude of Western countries that in the times of crisis, they only look for themselves and they never think of any poor country. Now these countries, the poorer countries and the other countries which are regional hegemons or which are regional powers, they are now looking at BRICS as a platform where they can air their grievances and where they can form an anti-West alliance, or they can show some of their worth in this platform or such kind of groupings. Yet another reason is the New Development Bank. See, BRICS formed a New Development Bank as well as a contingency reserve arrangement. New Development Bank is just like World Bank or ADB, that is Asian Development Bank. It gives money for the development. So poorer countries, they want money so that this money they can invest in their own country, and the development speed with which they are developing, the rate of development increases. Similarly, the contingency reserve arrangement is a platform, or let's say it is a mechanism through which if there is any liquidity failures for any poor countries, they can come and take away some money from that and they can return it whenever their liquidity mismatch is not anymore happening. So for this funds also, the other countries are interested. Similarly, China is one country which is having so much funds. India is one country which is having a such large market, and therefore many of these countries, they are also looking at trade prospects as well as investment prospects from BRICS. They would want funds from China as well as they would want good trade relations with India, as it provides a huge, humongous market to these countries. And therefore, again, this is also, it seems like many countries want to become a member of BRICS. Now we see that almost 40 countries have applied for it, and recently India has also said that it is actually in favor of expansion of BRICS, but then it should be consensus based. The reason is that India fears that BRICS might become yet another platform just like SCO, where all countries are actually allied with China, and India, despite being a member, loses its voice, and therefore it wants only those members who are very sensitive about its own position in the international affairs. It wants only those countries which appreciate that India is an important member and they are not overtly allied with China as part of the BRICS. So it does want it to be representative and expanded, but yet there are certain conditions, that is consensus, which it wants before any member is being admitted. A very important quote has been written by Happymon Jacob in this article, and it would be good if you can write this article or this quote in the introduction or the conclusion, because it will give you good marks. So this quote is basically, international politics should not be the place for hegemonic perfection. Hegemony means when any country is having any undue influence in the international affairs. Just like US was having before China grew up and after Soviet Union had collapsed. So international politics should not be the place for hegemonic perfection, but of democratic imperfection. That is, it is possible that the only unipolar world might be very clear and it might seem very simple, and yet that is not what international community wants. A democratic world which is having multiple poles might seem much more imperfect, but then it is what the international community desires, because no one country should be in a position that it dominates the other countries. That is what is meant by this quote. So now on the basis of this, this is the main question: the lack of momentum in UN reforms, that is the expansion of United Nations Security Council, the expansion of permanent members, has led to the nations pursuing alternate strategies for self-survival and preservation. So you have to discuss that what are the other strategies with the members or the other international community nations they are taking when UN reforms are not being seen on the horizon. So please discuss that, and if you want, you can mark your answers in the comment section also, or you can just email it to us at prepezee@gmail.com so that we can reply and we can give a feedback on your writing skills. So if you like this article, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.